So the question is the Supreme Court going to handle this? And if the Supreme Court takes up the case immediately, is there going to be a firestorm? It's going to be a firestorm. Next week, the Electoral College meets, and presumably, absent some dramatic intervention, Vice President Biden will be chosen by the Electoral College, and then it will go to Congress, who can object or not object and count the votes. So what's happening to stop that potentiality from happening is, well, first of all, many things are. There have been several lawsuits that are still pending, specifically in Wisconsin and Georgia, that seem to me to have quite credible claims that the results in favor of Biden are not licit, L-I-C-I-T. Yeah, that's the way you spell it, licit, in the sense that you had the superstructure of those states' elections undermined by state officials who acted outside their authority to change the rules, and that resulted in votes that should not have been counted being counted. So those are the allegations in the various lawsuits. Now, beyond that, the state of Texas has filed a lawsuit against, I think, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, essentially saying the same thing, that their rights, the rights of their citizens, and the Texas's rights under the Constitution have been harmed by the actions of those states in endorsing certifying results that are not correct. That's the allegation. They're challenging those results. So, and I encourage you to read the Texas lawsuit, because it's a nice summation of what the issues are concerning what happened in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And what's been, so Texas is sued in the Supreme Court. Now, there's a big fight over whether the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction and therefore will hear this case. And what is original jurisdiction? In the Constitution, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction on disputes between the states. And that's essentially jurisdiction that can't be limited by Congress. It's in the Constitution. One of the dirty little secrets is that Congress can limit the jurisdiction of the courts, except in matters which involve original jurisdiction between the states, where there's a fight between one state and the other, a legal constitutional fight. Now, previously, based on expert analysis I've seen on the issue, even though they do have original jurisdiction on some of these claims, they tell those bringing them sometimes, you know what, let it litigate it in the lower courts, and then we'll take it up. That way we have a record that we can follow up on, because they don't like, is for obvious reasons, having to try cases essentially in the Supreme Court and conduct the sort of fact finding that lower courts typically do. I don't think they can do that in this case specifically. I just don't see how, given the gravamen of this case, the gravity of this case, that they can say to a district court judge in, I don't know where would the district court judge be? I mean, that's one of the issues, isn't it? In Texas? Would it be in Pennsylvania, Georgia? Where? That they can tell a district court judge to figure out if Texas is right versus these four other states. Now, since the claim has been filed, I think 17 other states, maybe it's increased since then, have filed Amicus support for the Texas claim. The president himself has intervened through John Eastman, the professor I told you about last time, whose analysis on these issues I think deserves serious consideration. I encourage you to look him up. So I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. I think most of the briefing's been done. In my view, and one of the problems I've had with the courts to date, is that because of either politics, meaning you just had political judges who were never going to give Trump the time of day that he was otherwise due under law, or fear, where you had other judges who frankly should know better, being afraid of the consequences, confronting I think the serious claims of illegal election activity. That's what I think you would call it, by state officials. And by that I mean is that they didn't want to they didn't want to be placed in a position of saying Trump won. They didn't want to be in the position of saying those votes shouldn't count for Biden. They refused to be put in that position, even though that's what we're paying them to do. So in my view, the judges have failed to address this issue largely for two reasons: fear and politics. Or I should say fear and/or politics, because sometimes there's a mix, as you know. So the question is the Supreme Court going to handle this? And if the Supreme Court takes up the case immediately, is there going to be a firestorm? It's going to be a firestorm. Because these are serious claims, in my view. You just cannot look at the Georgia lawsuit, which I encourage you to look at. You cannot look at the Wisconsin lawsuit. You can't look at the allegations in Pennsylvania and think those elections were conducted on the up and up. And I think the courts have to grapple with that. And they can't say they don't like the consequences. What they try to say is the relief is out of proportion to what is being alleged. Oh, they may have broke the rules, but we can't do anything about it. Well, that's not true. Or they misconstrue the relief as being gargantuan when it's frankly more limited, although politically much more explosive than they would like. Because the allegations by the left is, if these challenges succeed, you're overturning the will of the American people. And the response to that would be, if the challenges proceed or succeed, you're affirming the lawful will of the American people. By keeping ballots out of the system that shouldn't have been counted, or by highlighting that the system or the election was conducted in such a way, or at least a part of the election was conducted in such a way that you can't trust the outcome. That doesn't mean everyone's votes are thrown out. It just means that certain votes were put in dispute and set aside. And that happens all the time in elections. Already votes have been thrown out. Did you know that? Already votes have been thrown out? It's done in the ordinary course in counting ballots. And so this is a common dispute, is how many votes should be thrown out. Now, the left is calling this sedition. To pursue litigation to vindicate your civil rights is sedition. That's the left's approach. Now, as I've highlighted to you, and Judicial Watch has highlighted in a special report, which is available on our website, and I think we can link to it below, the left had a transition integrity project. Transition integrity project. And it was run out of Harvard University. And it was a war game. So you had some anti-Trumper playing Donald Trump, and you had John Podesta, who is, in the center of the Democrat establishment, playing Joe Biden. And of course, they presumed President Trump was going to do all these unlawful acts I'm getting something to drink here, excuse me, to do all these unlawful acts to keep himself in power. And in response, they thought this is what John Podesta was planning to do, or wargaming in his role as Joe Biden. The left had actually wargamed the scenario of having two slates of electors being appointed or competing slates of electors being appointed in a state, which I guess Republicans aren't allowed to pursue as a constitutional option. But this is where they went off the rails in terms of the rule of law. The plan was that if the Biden slate wasn't accepted by Congress, Podesta's war game had other Democrat states threatened to secede from the Union in order to get Biden's electors seated or counted. So they were threatening to put the country into a civil war in order to get President Trump removed. And they're calling it sedition for President Trump to exercise his legal options under the law. Of course, that can't be the case. And it's a smear. It's an absolute smear. So I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. And I don't encourage you to call the Supreme Court, but I do encourage you to call your state legislators, especially if you live in Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, or Nevada. Because there are substantial questions about how Biden won those states. And if these claims are accurate, his victory could be overturned potentially. And as I said, in Georgia, it's a substantial claim. Wisconsin, similarly, they changed the rules and counted ballots they weren't allowed to count. It's a simple claim. It doesn't rely on believing that Hugo Chavez changed the election or computer systems were manipulated. I'm not saying those areas shouldn't be looked at or asked questions about, but this is pretty simple stuff, which is driving the left crazy. Just driving the left crazy. And which is why YouTube and Google, I don't know, maybe I said something wrong here that's going to result in this video being taken down from YouTube. I don't know. But Google and YouTube are now interfering in the election by censoring discussion about the election in a truthful discussion. Twitter is labeling and censoring and suppressing material, so is Facebook. Big tech has come down on the side of Joe Biden here, and it's not based on anything other than politics. It's arbitrary, capricious. I know there's a target on my back. I know there's a target on Judicial Watch's back. I've already been censored. Judicial Watch has already been censored. I remember I was locked out of Twitter. I don't even remember why. So call your state legislatures. So getting back to what I was talking about, call your state legislators. Let them know what you think about whether they should endorse and ratify the elections by doing nothing. Because by doing nothing, they're doing something, right? To do nothing in the face of this, the certifications that have taken place, is to ratify them. And anyone who tells you otherwise is blowing smoke in your ear. And no, they don't need governors, in my view, under the Constitution, to call themselves back into session to deal with this. Secondly, call your members of Congress, because on January 6th, Congress will count the ballots. Count the Electoral College ballots. And there are opportunities to challenge or to object to electors from states in which the objectors believe the elections have been compromised. So Mo Brooks, who's a Republican from Alabama, has been the only House member to say he'll object. There's been no senator. There's been no senator. Now, I've pressed non-publicly folks on the Hill about this, and the feedback I've gotten, I've said, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? Is that they're looking for a court case to hang their hat on, and I don't think that is politically brave. I think it's a weak approach. I mean, in the least, the Senate should be having emergency hearings on the election crisis, don't you think? I want one senator to come forward and say, yes, I believe these elections, electoral college counts, should be scrutinized. I mean, you don't even have to, I understand the politicians. They're not going to do everything you want them to do. We can put out the guide star out there so that or the North Star out there, that they can, what they should do. And there are things short of that they can do that they still haven't done. So call your senators, call your congressmen, and call your state legislators. Now, a number of states have signed on to this Texas lawsuit. I don't know, check to see if your state has, see if they've been done what you wanted them to do too. And even if you live in a state where you think your voice won't be heard, you've got to make your voice heard. As I said before, calling is always important, even if you think you're calling to an official who disagrees with you. They do note the temperature, I think it's the best way to put it, in the COVID era of their voters. And they note, and then one way of figuring out what the temperature is by looking at the calls. So, I mean, you may think someone disagrees with you, but they get a billion calls saying, do the other thing. And what it might do is actually temper what they say, what they push for behind the scenes, what they're willing to endorse publicly. You'd be surprised. So just because your senator or representative is not someone who shares your political philosophy, it's frankly is as important to let them know what you think as it would be just because you think they share your political philosophy and be more willing to listen to you. They were your representative, and even if they don't like your politics, they still sometimes listen to you. So I don't want to overstate it, but all you can do is what you can do. And I'm telling you what you can do. Call your representatives. They still have a role to play. It's not over. On January 20th, actually, when you look at the federal law envisions disputes in Congress actually going past Inauguration Day. And what happens if that happens? The Speaker of the House is supposed to step down, if she wants in this case, and become acting president until the dispute is resolved. So, my view is that there is a substantial case to be made that the president won the election. There's a substantial case to be made that the president won the election. And with that being said, you should, if you agree with me, or maybe if you don't, you call too. I'm not telling you what to say. You don't have to necessarily agree with me, but you should participate. You should participate beyond voting, because clearly voting on election day isn't enough to resolve election disputes, because public officials have roles to play in resolving those disputes afterwards.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.